So today, we're going to dive into the incredibly complicated relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan. I mean, these are two neighbors whose fates are completely tangled up, but their history? It's really a story of shared culture constantly clashing with some deep, deep political conflict.
And that brings up the big question, right? How can two countries that share a border, a religion, and all these ethnic ties have a history that's just so full of friction and mistrust? It's a paradox that has really defined the entire region for, well, over 70 years now.
On one side, you've got the people. The Pashtun communities, for instance, they live on both sides of that border. They share language, they share culture. But then you look at the governments, and right from the very beginning, their relationship has been, let's just say, anything but friendly.
To really get what's happening today, we have to rewind the clock all the way back to 1947, when Pakistan was first created. Because the seeds of all this mistrust, they were planted almost immediately, and they set the stage for decades of trouble.
And right at the heart of the whole problem is this thing called the Durand Line. This is the border, okay? It was drawn back when the British were in India, and it has been a massive source of tension ever since. Afghanistan has actually never officially recognized it as the real international border. That's a fundamental problem right from day one.
I mean, things went bad almost instantly. Can you imagine you're this brand new country and your next-door neighbor is the only nation in the entire world to vote against you joining the United Nations? That's exactly what Afghanistan did. On top of that, they started making claims on Pakistani territory, even though the people living there had already voted to be part of Pakistan. It was just a really hostile way to begin a relationship. So the decades that came after weren't just one long, continuous fight. Instead, it was this really volatile cycle. You'd have these huge breaking points and then these fragile attempts to kind of patch things up over and over again.
Just look at this timeline. In 1955, the Pakistani embassy in Kabul gets ransacked and relations totally collapse. A year later, a presidential visit does pretty much nothing. By 61, they've broken off ties again. But then it gets weird. During Pakistan's wars with India, Afghanistan just stays neutral. And by the 70s, there's even a little bit of a thaw in relations. It was a constant diplomatic roller coaster, which just goes to show you how shaky the foundation was.
So for more than 30 years, you have this pattern, this back and forth. But in 1979, an invasion is about to happen that won't just rattle the relationship. It's going to completely shatter the old dynamics and reshape the entire region forever. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan. And look, this was not just another diplomatic argument. This was a geopolitical earthquake. All of a sudden, the Cold War was right on Pakistan's doorstep, and the country's whole role in the world is about to change, big time.
The first, most immediate impact was just human. As the Soviet army pushed in, millions of Afghans literally ran for their lives, and about 3 million of them poured across the border into Pakistan. It created one of the biggest refugee crises in the world at that time.
And in response, Pakistan, with a ton of help from the United States and other Western allies, completely transformed. It went from being Afghanistan's difficult neighbor to being the central hub for the entire Afghan Mujahideen resistance against the Soviets. It basically became a key player in a massive global proxy war.
Well, eventually, the Soviets pulled out, defeated. And yeah, that was seen as this huge victory. But that decade-long war left behind a truly devastating legacy inside Pakistan itself, a whole set of unintended consequences that the country is still dealing with to this day.
You see, the war didn't just stay in Afghanistan. It spilled right over the border, and it brought with it a flood of weapons, a booming drug trade that was used to fund the fighting, and the rise of extremist ideologies. This whole period fundamentally changed Pakistani society, embedding this new, dangerous culture of violence and radicalism.
So, after the Soviets left, Afghanistan just fell into this chaotic civil war. Pakistan, looking for some stability on its border and also, frankly, for strategic advantage against its rival India, made a huge decision. It decided to back a new, fundamentalist group that was promising to bring order to its war-torn neighbor.
So Pakistan actively encouraged and supported the Taliban's campaign to take over the country. And by 1996, that strategy worked. The Taliban marched into Kabul. A year later, Pakistan became one of just a handful of countries to formally recognize their government, which for a little while actually improved relations between the two states.
And this really brings us full circle, doesn't it? This quote just perfectly sums up the whole complex history we've just walked through. Even after invasions and refugees and all these strategic shifts, that fundamental paradox is still there. A deep, deep connection between the people, but a constant hostility between the governments.
So, as we look back on this incredibly tumultuous history, From diplomatic insults to full-blown proxy wars and all the violent mess that came after, we're left with a really important question. What are the lessons from this long cycle of intervention and blowback? And is it even possible for these two nations to break free from this history and build a stable future for the region? The answer to that? Well, it's still being written.